तव तप्तजीवनं कविभिरीडितं कल्मषापहं श्रवणमङ्गलं श्रीमदाततं भुवि गणन्ति ये भूरिदा जनाः. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Last week, in our last class, we were continuing to discuss the entry from Thursday, August 24th, 1882. And we saw that Mahendranath Gupta, the author of this text, asked Sri Ramakrishna three big questions. I'll repeat those questions. Sir, what is the meaning of the realization of God? Ishvara labha. Second, what do you mean by God vision? Here the Bengali term is Ishwar Darshana, as opposed to Ishvara labha. Third question, how does one attain it? How do you attain this God vision? And last week we discussed Sri Ramakrishna's answers to the first and third questions. What is the meaning of Ishvara labha, God realization, and how do we attain it, or attain God vision? But we did not cover Sri Ramakrishna's response to M's second question. What do you mean by God vision, Ishvara Darshana? That's what the section that we'll be discussing today starts with. Because he's happy with Sri Ramakrishna's answers to 1 and 3, but now he's eager to hear the answer to 2. So he reminds Sri Ramakrishna of that question, but in a very interesting way. So, first of all, let's see here. I think is it the beginning of a new section? No. Okay. So it's a continuation of the previous section. And M asks Sri Ramakrishna, when one sees God, does one see God with these eyes? It's a very interesting question. Ishwar ke darshan ki ei chokke hai. So it's clear that this is referring to M's second question. Why? Because that Ishvara Darshana term is used. It's not Ishvara Labha, it's Ishvara Darshana. Okay, when you have a vision of God, do you see God with your physical eyes? Sri Ramakrishna, God cannot be seen with these physical eyes. In the course of spiritual discipline, one gets a love body. The Bengali is Premeshwari. Prema Sharira. Endowed with love eyes, love ears, and so on. One sees God with those love eyes. One hears the voice of God with those love ears. One even gets a sexual organ made of love. And the Bengali here is linga yoni. So the organs respectively of men and women. At these words, M burst out laughing. He finds it funny? Okay. It's like a kindergartner. The master continued, unannoyed. Sri Ramakrishna, he's patient. He says, with this love body, the soul communes with God. Actually, if you look at the original Bengali, the Bengali is, for the soul communes with God, Atmar Shohit Ramon Hoy. I think Sri Ramakrishna is explicitly using the word Ramana here as a continuation of the sexual metaphor. So it's actually literally the soul has intercourse with, and it's not God, it's Atma, interestingly. Which doesn't, it could mean God, but I think it's broader than that. It could just be capital S self as well, Atma. Okay, then. M again became serious after his little chuckle, kindergarten chuckle. Okay, Master, but this is not possible without intense love of God. One sees nothing but God everywhere when one loves him with great intensity. It is like a person with jaundice who sees everything yellow. Then one feels, I am verily he. A drunkard, deeply intoxicated, says, verily I am Kali. The gopis, intoxicated with love, exclaimed, verily I am Krishna. One who thinks of God day and night beholds him everywhere. It is like a man's seeing flames on all sides, after he has gazed fixedly at one flame for some time. But that isn't the real flame flashed through M's mind. He's just thinking this thought, this objection. Sri Ramakrishna, who could read a man's inmost thought. Actually, the Bengali here is one word. Antarjami. Sri Ramakrishna, who is Antaryami, the inner controller, said, one doesn't lose consciousness by thinking of him who is all spirit, all consciousness. The word here in Bengali and Sanskrit is Chaitanya. Shivanath once remarked that too much thinking about God confounds the brain. Thereupon I said to him, how can one become unconscious by thinking of consciousness? M. Yes, sir, I realize that. It isn't like thinking of an unreal object. How can a man lose his intelligence if he always fixes his mind on him whose very nature is eternal intelligence? Another Bengali issue I just want to point out quickly before we get to some of the details, starting from the beginning of what I just read. The term used for consciousness is Chaitanya, right? To refer to God, Satchitananda, like that. And the opposite of that is going crazy, losing one's marbles. And the term used by Sri Ramakrishna there is Achaitanya. Just adding an A next to it makes it the opposite. Okay? Interestingly, though, when M responds and he says, yes, sir, I realize that. It isn't like thinking of an unreal object. How can a man lose his intelligence if he always fixes his mind on him whose very nature is eternal intelligence? Suddenly, Nikhilanandaji changes the term from consciousness to intelligence, even though it's the same Bengali terms in the original. So in Bengali, the terms are যিনি নিত্য চৈতন্য স্বরূপ তাঁতে মন লাগিয়ে দিলে মানুষ কেন অচৈতন্য হবে? Exactly the same, well, not exactly the same terms. So I'll give you the exact. So what Nikhilanandaji is translating as eternal intelligence, him whose very nature is eternal intelligence, the Bengali is nitya chaitanya swarupa. Nitya chaitanya swarup. So how can somebody meditating on, concentrating on nitya chaitanya swarupa, eternal consciousness, become, and then he uses Sri Ramakrishna's own term, achaitanya. So I would say to be consistent, it would be better, I think, to translate the term chaitanya consistently as consciousness, divine consciousness, rather than as intelligence in this case. So that's a minor issue. Okay, now let's back up to the beginning. This very interesting question that M asks. When one sees God, does one see God with these eyes? And the first thing to point out, the translation has, when one sees God, does one see him with these eyes? As usual, it's not gendered in the original Bengali, so we could easily say, does one see her with these eyes as well? Okay. Sri Ramakrishna's first line response is, God cannot be seen with these physical eyes, giving a very emphatic answer. Now I've got a question for all of you. And to be honest, I don't know the answer to the question. January 1st, 1883, so it's a few months later, because it's August 24th, 1882 now. About 4 months later, Sri Ramakrishna says the following. I used to see God directly with these very eyes, just as I see you. Now I see divine visions in trance. So how is this not a contradiction? You solve my problem, because I can't figure out, I'm having difficulty reconciling what he says on January 1st, 1883 with this statement here. And we want a mic. Hey, Dinesh or Rama. Oh, thank you. Okay.
You can't see that.
Just take the mic. Why so shy?
The first one, I think he said, you can't see it with these eyes.
You? Oh, no, he wrote God cannot be seen. But clever attempt. But no, because Sri Ramakrishna specifically says, taake chormo chokke dekha jay na. So he's not saying you. Okay.
Maybe he's talking in certain senses, and maybe we've lost some kind of specific... Is something lost in translation here? Like, does he mean... Is he talking in like hyperbole?
When? In which case?
The second case.
With
these very eyes.
It seems very unlikely, because I read the original.
He could be talking, he's a storyteller, he could be talking very emphatically, okay, so and there might be something lost in translation.
Yeah, but this is, well, no, I did see the Bengali, and it's very much what I just read out in English.
It's the same?
Yeah, because he's talking about his own spiritual experience. He says, I used to see God directly with these very eyes. I mean, he's very emphatic. Just as I see you, he adds. Now I see divine visions in trance. Anyone else want to take a stab? Yeah, Rahul, can you pass it to Rahul in the back?
I think
I'd have to look it up. That's. Okay, but I'm not. is it in this? Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Rahul.
Yeah, I think maybe here he's answering the question, which is to a person who is pretty far from any stage at which you can see God, and he's trying to say that probably.
Wait, are you talking about this scenario 1 or 2? Which one are you?
When he's talking to M.
Oh, okay, yeah. So say it again.
So he's trying to tell him that your conception that you see them just as you would see a normal person is very far from reality, and probably the first experience of God is in a very different way. And then probably if you're in a very elevated state like Sri Ramakrishna, you might even...
Oh, I see. So that's interesting. So you're saying that in his response to M, he's saying you're barking up the wrong tree if you think that you can see God, just with the same eyes that you, without transforming yourself or something like that.
Yeah.
And then in the later statement made 4 months later, I just looked it up. It's on page 176 of Nikalanji's translation. He's saying that there are further, very advanced stages in spiritual experience where you can literally see God with these very eyes. Yeah. So that's an interesting way of reconciling. But can you give the mic to Adya?
Like Gopalar Ma would see Bal Gopal, when she's meditating, she wasn't in trances or anything. She would just see him play when she's trying to meditate or do japa. She would just see baby Krishna playing with her and trying to distract her and all of those things. She was not necessarily in
in a
trance, but
like losing external consciousness.
Yeah, she had consciousness of the world. She could see her own
Even Ramakrishna
deeds.
himself when he did the Ramlala sadhana, and he was literally seeing Ramlala scurrying around, and he was taking care of him. So. Okay, everybody's got to.
So it just occurs to me that when in the second instance where he says he sees God with his very eyes, that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else sitting right over there would also see God.
No, certainly not.
So it's maybe not with a physical manifestation that Western science would say, well, that's
you mean
God
that should be
too.
universally visible to everybody? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So certainly he's not saying that.
It is with subtle eyes that you get from your love body. If you could use those same analogies.
Okay, but then why does he say then, I used to see God directly with these very eyes? That's the tricky part. So again, hyperbole, as you're going in the hyperbole direction. Okay,
I think the core philosophy has always been, that Shivo Gyana Jivo Seva. So probably in one instance, when he's explaining that with these eyes I've seen God, he's saying that, when I look at any being for that matter, beings. So probably one version of perspective is that.
That's an interesting approach.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm inclined to read it very strongly as when he says, I used to see God directly with these very eyes, he really means it. And I think even I was going to say that this Vijnana experience, but then we're going to get to it soon. He does explain this Vijnana stuff in the context of the love body, though, as far as I can tell. So anyway, okay, I think we should probably move on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So for those of you who are interested, he's speaking to Pran Krishna. It's in that context that he says that. And you can look it up, January 1st, 1883. And anyone online, if you want to take a stab at trying to reconcile the January 1st, 1883 statement with what he says here on August 24th, 1882, please feel free to add it in the comments. Okay, so that's one thing. Also, he says you cannot have this extraordinary vision of God by means of the love body without intense love of God. And he says that person who has intense love of God sees God everywhere. This is what Sri Ramakrishna calls the state of Vijnana in many other places in the gospel. The interesting thing is, he says, it is like a person with jaundice who sees everything yellow. Then one feels, I am verily he, or I am verily God, she, God. if anyone is familiar with Shankara's philosophy, I am verily he is very frequently taught. I am none other than God. Aham Brahmasmi, I am none other than Brahman. And so is he bringing in this kind of classical Advaitic formula, or is it something different? So my suggestion is there are two very different ways of understanding this great statement or realization. I am God, okay? From the standpoint of classical Advaita Vedanta, they interpret the statement in a specific way. And there's a technical term used which is called Jahad Ajahad Lakshana. Okay, and the claim is that the individual soul, the jiva, is identical to Ishvara, the personal God, Saguna Brahman. In what sense? If you remove the individuality of the jiva, the individual soul, right, what's left is non-dual pure consciousness. If you remove the Ishvaratva from Ishvara, the Saguna, the personal godness of the personal God, what's left is the same non-dual pure consciousness. So when classical Advaitins say, I am God, what they mean is remove the individuality from the I, remove the personal godness, that sounds weird, of God, personality of the personal God, yeah. Then what's left is the same non-dual pure consciousness, the substratum. Now, I think what he means, though, is something different in this context, because the context here is vigana, which is not easy to fit within the classical Advaitic framework. Sri Ramakrishna would say the Vijnani sees that Brahman itself has become the 24 cosmic principles. In that sense, and he would say Divine Mother has become everything. She's playfully manifesting as everything. I think he has in mind that kind of interpretation of I am verily she, I am verily God. It means there's nothing but God. There's nothing but Divine Mother. And she's playfully manifesting as me, as you, as the chairs, as the table, and so on and so forth. So it's a kind of a different way of thinking about the same statement, but just giving it a more of a Vijnana interpretation. Okay. Can you pass the mic to her?
But in view of the process of self-involution, so you're actually seeing he's viewing him through the 24 cosmic principles. So, in essence, you're seeing each jiva as it is existing within the Ishvara.
Yeah, not within. I wouldn't say within, but as a playful manifestation of Ishvara. Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you. Okay, and anything else I want to talk about before we move on? Oh yeah, the very end. Sri Ramakrishna is very pleased with M's understanding. They're on the same page. And Sri Ramakrishna says with pleasure, it is through God's grace that you understand that. The doubts of the mind will not disappear without God's grace. Doubts do not disappear without self-realization. This is an important point, I think. Many of us in spiritual life, spiritual aspirants often do have doubts of different kinds. And we sometimes beat ourselves up about it, feeling a little guilty. You know, if I had real faith, I wouldn't have these doubts, something like that. So it's kind of reassuring when Sri Ramakrishna says, doubts do not disappear without self-realization, which means until you have attained the highest goal of realization, there will always be some doubts. And this is not just Sri Ramakrishna saying that. It's very much, you can find the same idea in the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita. I'll give you one example. Mundaka Upanishad 2.2.8, famous mantra. Vidyate hridaya grantish chidyante sarva samshayaha kshiyante chase karmani tasmin drishte paravare. When you have attained the realization of the highest, the supreme Brahman, then and only then, chidyante sarva samshayaha, all doubts are cut asunder. And then there's more to the verse, but that's the relevant part here. Okay? So I think that's an important point that he makes as well. Don't feel guilty about doubts. Ask your guru and have all your questions answered. All right, so now let's continue. Sri Ramakrishna continues. But one need not fear anything if one has received the grace of God. It is rather easy for a child to stumble if he holds his father's hand, but there can be no such fear if the father holds the child's hand. A man does not have to suffer anymore if God he's writing in his grace. In this case, I think it's right to say his, because he's talking about a father. It's a metaphor. Okay. A man does not have to suffer anymore if God in his grace removes his doubts and reveals himself to him. But this grace descends upon him only after he has prayed to God with intense yearning of heart and practiced spiritual discipline. The mother feels compassion for her child when she sees him running about breathlessly. She has been hiding herself. Now she appears before the child. But why should God make us run about, thought M. Again, this is just a thought. He doesn't actually verbalize it. Immediately, Sri Ramakrishna said, it is his will. I'm going to change that to her. It is her will that we should run about a little. Then it is great fun. God has created the world in play, as it were. This is called Mahamaya, the great illusion. Nicola, we'll talk about that in a second. Therefore, one must take refuge in the Divine Mother, the cosmic power itself. It is she who has bound us with the shackles of illusion. The realization of God is possible only when those shackles are severed. Okay, there are a few translation issues. There's a lot here philosophically as well. Let's start to unpack this a little bit. Really interesting questions are being raised here. Sri Ramakrishna is saying, Divine Mother deliberately hides herself from us, her poor creatures. So naturally, you want to ask, why does she hide herself from us? Isn't that cruel? Isn't that mean? Wouldn't it be nice if God just revealed herself to us? Wouldn't that make things a lot easier? We wouldn't have to go through millions of lifetimes as plants and amoeba until we finally get realization and liberation. So M kind of asks this question, but why should God make us run about in the first place? I think there are two different questions that are implied here, at least. One is the famous problem of evil that you find, the problem of evil and suffering that you find in philosophy of religion and theology. This is the question of, if God is loving and God is perfectly omnipotent, all-powerful, then why in the world does God permit us to suffer so much? Because if God is omnipotent, God would be able to prevent us from suffering. And if God is perfectly loving, God would want to prevent us from suffering. Because why would somebody who loves us want us to suffer? This is the age-old problem of evil. And Sri Ramakrishna answers, we're actually, I'll read in the next section his answer. But before I get to his answer, let me continue explaining this. So that's one problem. That's one facet of the problem that I think M is posing. But there's another side of it. And this is another problem that's being discussed actually pretty actively now by contemporary philosophers. It's called the problem of divine hiddenness. And if you want to look it up, there's a philosopher named J.L. Schellenberg, Schellenberg, who's written whole books on this topic. The problem of divine hiddenness. And it's very technical in the details, but the overall idea is this. He says, the fact that there are people who want to believe in God, who are very open to believing in God, and yet God is not revealing himself or herself to these people, suggests or makes it reasonable to believe that God does not exist. So it's a kind of variant on the problem of evil, but with its own twist. And I think that M is I think he has in mind both these things, the problem of evil and the problem of divine hiddenness. And, okay. Oh, I see. Oh, I did read part of the answer already. Okay. So, what is Sri Ramakrishna's answer? It is her will that we should run about a little. Then it is great fun. Great fun for whom? For us or for her? So that's the problem again. It's great fun for Divine Mother, but as the future Swami Turiyanji put it, Hari, later in the Gospel, he says, but her play is our death. Amra Jamuri, we're dying, her play, that's great, but that's good for her, but what about us? So just saying that it's the play of the Divine Mother is not good enough, it seems to me. And this is a case, and there are many cases of this, I think, where if you take one statement of Sri Ramakrishna's in isolation, from the rest of the gospel, you end up distorting what his actual overall position is. That's why I've devoted 2 chapters of my book on Sri Ramakrishna, Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, just on the issue of the problem of evil, and piecing together from all of his different teachings on the problem of evil, his response to the problem of evil, reconstructing a kind of coherent response. And I'm going to just explain briefly what those other elements are, okay? They occur in other parts of the gospel. In another place, somebody asks him, why in the world does God endow us with evil, selfish qualities in the first place, like lust and greed? And Sri Ramakrishna's answer is, in order to create saints. Mohat lok toyer korben bole. Then he says, it's only by grappling with and struggling with our lower impulses, selfish impulses, that we grow and evolve morally and spiritually, and ultimately become saints. Not in one lifetime, but eventually every single one of us is guaranteed this liberation. And I call this his saint-making theodicy. Theodicy means explaining why God permits all this suffering in the world. Saint-making, because her overarching purpose, just because something is play doesn't mean that it's completely random and chaotic and that it has no purpose. Just think of any sports game. They're all governed by rules, very strict rules. That's why they're referees and players. If they don't abide by the rules, they get punished for them in different ways, right? So in the same way, Divine Mother's Leela, her cosmic play, has certain rules. And I would emphasize especially 3 rules: karma, rebirth, and universal liberation. So I'll explain them briefly. Karma, he says, if you eat a chili, won't your tongue burn? That's karma. Whatever you do, whatever you reap, you reap whatever you sow. That's the basic idea, right? If you do something good, that's going to have good karmic consequences. If you do something bad, it'll have bad karmic consequences. And how is that relevant to us, and how does that help us? Because we learn from our mistakes. So even when we do something wrong or bad, we're going to reap what we sow. And then eventually, it may not be immediate, it depends on how quick a learner we are. Eventually we grow and we learn, and we try to avoid that same mistake in the future. That's the idea. So that's karma. And I'll just mention one thing. There are 2 different conceptions of karma, which we can contrast. One is the kind of mainstream understanding of karma in Hinduism, which is a retributive understanding of karma. The purpose of karma is to reward or punish us. I do something good, God says, here's a lollipop. I do something bad, slap on the face. But there's I think, a more spiritually fruitful way of thinking about the doctrine of karma that I think Sri Ramakrishna subscribes to, Swami Vivekananda subscribes to, Sri Aurobindo subscribes to, and others. It's called the evolutionary conception of karma. Here the idea is that it's true that if I do something good, there will be good consequences karmically, and if I do something bad, there will be bad consequences. But the overarching purpose of the law of karma is not to reward or punish us, but to foster our moral and spiritual growth and evolution. That's the idea. And I think that's exactly what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, because he's saying the ultimate purpose of this law of karma and rebirth and universal salvation is to make saints out of every single one of us. All right? Can you pass the mic to Adya? Thank you. Here, in the front.
Explain this part. I don't want to. I had a different, a question.
Not about this. Well,
not directly. I mean, it's just a different way of phrasing the problem of evil.
Okay. Just hold off on that for a second. Let me complete what I was going to say. Okay, so that's evolutionary karma. Second, rebirth. Spiritual life is difficult, and the vast majority of people cannot attain the highest goal of life in one life. Until we do, we have to come back again and again. But fortunately, we will be given as many chances as is necessary in order to attain liberation. And nobody will be left out. That is the third doctrine called universal liberation. This is an extraordinarily reassuring doctrine. Vedantins, I don't want to say Vedantins, Ramakrishna Vedantins don't believe in an eternal hell, thank goodness. There's one school of Vedanta which does, Madhva school, but not to engage in name calling. But it's just one of his doctrines. I mean, it's not a criticism, it's a statement of fact. Okay, but fortunately, we don't believe in an eternal hell. We believe that everybody will get liberation. Some very rare souls in this life, the vast majority, much later. But nobody will be left out in the end. That's the idea. Okay, so those are the three elements in Sri Ramakrishna's response to the problem of evil in saint-making theodicy. But even that's not complete, because there's another objection that can be raised. Okay, fine, so I get it. Divine Mother's cosmic Leela is governed by certain rules: karma, rebirth, universal salvation, universal liberation, which makes saints out of all of us. But why in the world go to all this trouble and make us go to all this trouble? Why not just make us saints in the first place? Why not just populate this world with saints to begin with? Adam and Eve before the fall. Or I don't know if that's a good analogy. But anyway, you understand what I mean. Very hard to answer this question. So ultimately, Sri Ramakrishna has to appeal to a very different standpoint, okay? Intellectualism, rationality has fundamental limits in answering this kind of question. Reason can take us as far as what I would call this saint-making theodicy, basically. But spiritual experience begins where rationality ceases, or where it hits its limit. And Hari, when he asks Sri Ramakrishna that poignant question, but God's play is our death, what does Sri Ramakrishna say in response? So Hari, but this play of God is our death. Master, smiling, please tell me who you are. Please tell me who you are. God alone has become all this: Maya, the universe, living beings, and the 24 cosmic principles. As the snake I bite, and as the charmer I cure. It is God herself who has become both vidya and avidya, knowledge and ignorance. She remains deluded by the Maya of avidya, ignorance. Again, with the help of the Guru, she is cured by the Maya of vidya, knowledge. Ignorance, knowledge, and perfect wisdom. This is Nikalanji's translation, but it's agyana, jnana, vigyana. The jnani sees that God alone exists and is the doer, that she creates, preserves, and destroys. The vigyani sees that it is God who has become all this. So this caps Sri Ramakrishna's, this is his ultimate explanation or response to the problem of evil. How does he respond to it? By denying the very premise of the problem. Because the problem originates in the assumption of a distinction between God on the one hand and God's poor suffering creatures on the other, us, poor souls. And Sri Ramakrishna is saying there's no such distinction. Those poor creatures that you think you are none other than playful manifestations of Divine Mother herself. And it seems to me that the only way to answer these really, really deep objections about the problem of evil, like why didn't Divine Mother just create us all as saints in the first place, is to appeal to the spiritual, experiential standpoint of Vijnana, where the answer is, we're not different from her. This whole world is her own play, and she is all the players. Okay, there's a lot of heady philosophy there, and we can discuss this more later, but I want to, do you have a question about this?
It would seem like if he's suggesting that we're exactly like her, then our continuous search for our own internal and outer development would suggest that God or Mother is doing exactly the same thing. What would it be if I became a carpenter or a CEO? Or what would it be like? She is exploring too.
Okay, so I think in the beginning of your question you said we're like her. It's not that we're like her, we are her. We literally are her.
We are also, she in essence is exploring.
She's
what? Actually, in being her, we are the additional whole parts of her that are exploring, equally as she's doing as an intelligence of the universe. She's also exploring what are the parts within her. Like we explore the different parts of our own internal body.
Yeah, I mean, she's having fun, in a sense, just like multiplying in a sense and kind of manifesting in different ways, Yeah, that's one way of thinking about it, yeah.
The question I had was why at all, I mean, it kind of answered my question, what you were saying, but why at all is there a propensity for consciousness or awareness to identify itself with the contents of like awareness. Like us as awareness, we have a propensity and this momentum of constantly identifying with the contents that's appearing in our awareness, however subtle it is.
Right, and your question is why? Is that?
Yeah, why at all? Like, where is this momentum even coming from?
Right. I think he's about to get to it. I think he used the term avidya maya. It's the maya of ignorance, which, and you know, like in Kathopanishad, paranchikani vitranat swayambhus tasmat parang pashadina antaratman. Our senses are turned toward the world because of Maya, right? And as a result, we fail to see our own inner Atman, something like that.
But I guess you can't say why Maya because causation, it falls within Maya.
I think there you're going more into classical Advaita, but he'll always say Leela. It's mother's play.
And
Maya means something very different in Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy than it does in classical Advaita. I'm about to get to that, actually, because that's a very important philosophical issue. What does Maya mean? Okay? Now, that paragraph I've read, let me reread it again, because it's really important from a translation standpoint. Sri Ramakrishna said, "It is her will that we should run about a little. Then it is great fun. God has created the world in play, as it were. This is called Mahamaya Kama, the great illusion, capital G, capital I. The great illusion is not in the original Bengali." So he adds that. Okay, so actually the Bengali is, "Eri nam Mahamaya." This is called Mahamaya. He should have just stopped there. And then he adds the great illusion. I would suggest, the pattern I see throughout his translation is that he tends to skew Sri Ramakrishna's teachings sometimes in a classical Advaitic direction. And I think this is a good example of that. And it's consistent because then, two sentences later, or a couple sentences later, he says, "Therefore one must take refuge in the Divine Mother, the cosmic power itself." There the translation is fine. "It is she who has bound us with the shackles of illusion." ILLUSION. Again, what's the original? Maya pashe bende feleche. Maya pasha. The shackles of Maya. He's rendering Maya as illusion. But that's his own classical Advaitic interpretation, in my view. That's actually not in the original. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. And so, Nikhilanji, I think when he sees Sri Ramakrishna's reference to the term Maya, he is kind of instinctively interpreting or explaining Maya from the standpoint of classical Advaita Vedanta as a principle of illusion. And I think that's a serious mistake. Because Sri Ramakrishna is about to explain in what sense he takes Maya. And I would suggest that for Sri Ramakrishna, Maya is not at all a principle of illusion. It could be a principle of delusion, DELUSION, a delusive power. And it is a principle of manifestation, the way that Divine Mother manifests playfully as this entire world. That concept of Maya comes closer to Kashmiri Shaivism, the Kashmiri Shaivite concept of Maya, than to the classical Advaita concept of Maya. Did that answer your question? Okay, great. Okay, so now let's continue. The Master continued. "One must propitiate the Divine Mother, the primal energy." Let me just give you the Bengali for Adya Shakti Rupini. Adya Shakti, this Adya Shakti Rupini, in order to obtain God's grace. God herself is Mahamaya, who deludes the world with her illusion and conjures up the magic of creation, preservation, and destruction. Just keep that in mind. We'll revisit that in a second. "She has spread this veil of ignorance before our eyes. We can go into the inner chamber only when she lets us pass through the door. Living outside, we see only outer objects, but not that eternal being, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute. Therefore, it is stated in the Purana, here in the Bangla, the word is Chandi, Devi Mahatmyam, that deities like Brahma praised Mahamaya for the destruction of the demons Madhu and Kaitaba. Shakti alone is the root of the universe. That primal energy has two aspects. Here again, I think the Bengali is slightly different, but anyway, I'll just read Nikhilanji. That primal energy has two aspects, vidya and avidya. Avidya deludes. Avidya meaning ignorance. Avidya conjures up kamini kanchan, which casts the spell. Vidya begets devotion, kindness, wisdom, and love, which lead one to God. This avidya must be propitiated, and that is the purpose of the rites of Shakti worship. And in a footnote, Nikhilanji adds, in this worship, a woman is regarded as the representation of the Divine Mother. Okay, now let me just continue a little bit. The devotee assumes various attitudes toward Shakti in order to propitiate her. The attitude of a handmaid, a hero, or a child. A hero's attitude is to please her even as a man pleases a woman through intercourse. The worship of Shakti is extremely difficult. It is no joke. I passed 2 years as the handmaid and companion of the Divine Mother. But my natural attitude has always been that of a child toward its mother. I regard the breasts of any woman as those of my own mother. Women are, all of them, the veritable images of Shakti. Here, the Bengali for images is actually rupa. So I think forms might be a little bit better. Women are, all of them, the veritable forms of Shakti. In northwest India, the bride holds a knife in her hand at the time of marriage. In Bengal, a nut cutter. The meaning is that the bridegroom, with the help of the bride, who is the embodiment of the divine power, will sever the bondage of illusion. This is the heroic attitude. I never worshiped the Divine Mother that way. My attitude toward her is that of a child toward its mother. The bride is the very embodiment of Shakti. Haven't you noticed at the marriage ceremony how the groom sits behind like an idiot? But the bride, she is so bold. It's very funny. Okay, so now, a few things here to mention, translation issues and otherwise. Again, up to the top of the section that I read, God herself is Mahamaya. He writes God himself is Mahamaya, but I would render it as herself, is Mahamaya, who deludes the world. And what's even stranger is that, let me read you his sentence. God himself is Mahamaya, who deludes the world with her illusion. Okay, so I think we should consistently go with she here. God herself is Mahamaya, who deludes the world with her illusion. But again, illusion, is it there in the original? Don't think so. Okay. She adda shakti bhitore bidya avidya dui ache. Oh, that's later, sorry. Tini Mahamaya. And then, জগৎকে মুগ্ধ করে সৃষ্টি স্থিতি প্রলয় করছেন জগৎকে মুগ্ধ করে সৃষ্টি স্থিতি প্রলয় করছেন which means she is deluding this world by preserving, creating, and destroying this world. There's no mention of illusion, no mention of the magic of creation, so conjuring up the magic of creation, preservation, destruction, all suggesting illusionism. It's not there in the original. Okay, so I think these are very philosophically significant translation issues, which we should be aware of. Now, as I promised, what exactly does Sri Ramakrishna mean by Maya here? And how does it compare to the concept of Maya in classical Advaita, which many of us are familiar with? According to classical Advaita, Maya is a principle of illusion, right? This whole world is Maya, in the sense of being an illusory appearance. Like, what's actually a rope, I perceive as a snake. The snake is Maya. What's real is a rope. Okay? Now, Sri Ramakrishna doesn't understand Maya in that sense. First of all, Adya Shakti is a term he keeps using again and again. Adya Shakti, which is rendered here as primal energy. You can just call it primal Shakti. Okay? And Nikanji says that primal energy has two aspects, vidya and avidya. It's not quite that. সেই আদ্যা শক্তির ভিতরে বিদ্যা ও অবিদ্যা দুই আছে. Within this primal Shakti is both vidya and avidya. That's what's actually said. Or in or within this Adya Shakti is vidya and avidya. And then, so here's how I take it. There are two aspects of Maya. One is the Maya of ignorance, avidya Maya, through which Divine Mother deludes us. And we become identified with the body, with the mind, with the lower impulses. We act on these lower impulses. And then there's Vidya Maya, the Maya of knowledge, by means of which that same Divine Mother liberates us, helps us make moral and spiritual progress, gives us wonderful spiritual qualities and ethical qualities like compassion and selflessness and devotion and detachment and so on and so forth. And when he uses the term Mahamaya, I think what he's suggesting is, what he's implying at least, is that Mahamaya is the delusive aspect of that primal Shakti. Shakti contains both avidya and vidyamaya. Mahamaya is, I think, corresponds to the delusive aspect of this primal Shakti. It's Divine Mother deluding us with her avidyamaya, the maya of ignorance. Okay? So there are three things here. There's Mahamaya, which is the delusive aspect of Shakti. And Shakti herself, Divine Mother, is not just, she's not trying to delude us. That's one aspect of her. That's the Mahamaya aspect. And what does Sri Ramakrishna say? Therefore, you should take refuge in Mahamaya. You should take refuge in the very being who is deluding you. And saying, please don't delude me anymore. That's why one of his favorite prayers is, oh, Mother, please don't bewitch me, please don't delude me anymore with your world-bewitching Maya. You're going straight to the person who's actually deceiving you or deluding you, right? That's the idea. Can you bring the mic over here?
I'm just trying to grasp that Mahamaya is the delusive side aspect of Shakti. Mm-hmm. So like maybe I try to think of it as maybe like a curtain, and that's probably what that primal Shakti looks like to somebody on that one side before they cross over into a liberated state. Would that be a correct way of viewing that?
I don't think so, because she does delude us. Mm-hmm. It's actually true, but we're not different from her. She's deluding herself in a sense. She's playing a kind of game of hide and seek.
Like sock puppets on her hands?
Yeah. It's all of us are actually different forms of her. And she's playfully deluding herself in the form of us through her avidya maya. And she's playfully liberating other souls by means of her vidya maya. That's how I would put it.
Okay.
Yeah, Adya Shakti, Adya. Yes.
I say the primordial energy is the potentiality, and then Mahamaya is the show that's put on. Avidya Maya is like in that show, if you're choosing separateness, if you're choosing to see yourself as a separate being, others and myself, that's Avidya Maya. You're outside the Garden of Eden, you've taken a bite of the apple. And Vidya Maya is while you're in the show, in this manifest aspect, enjoying Mahamaya, you still understand the oneness behind everything. You're not in like this potentiality, in this unmanifest state. You're still seeing the play, the illusion.
I agree with some of what you said. I don't think that Shakti is just in a potential state.
No, it's the propensity of awareness, of consciousness to refract itself into different forms.
I know, it just sounds too classical Advaitic, all that language. Because that's not the way he defines Shakti. I'll tell you how he defines Shakti. He says, Jokon tini nishkriyo, tokon ami Brahma bole koy. Jokon tini shrishti bole koy, tokon ami Shakti bole koy. When I think of that ultimate reality as nishkriya, inactive, then I call it Brahman. And when I think of the same divine reality as creating, preserving, and destroying the universe, then I call it Shakti or Kali. So Shakti just is the dynamic aspect of the infinite divine reality.
It's the aspect, but Mahamaya is the show Shakti puts on.
Show is you're kind of doing this whole Nikhilananda move of conjures up the magic of creation, but that's not in the original.
Or the Icha and Kriya when it's like played out.
Oh, I see. Show not in an illusory sense.
No, not in a bad.
Manifestation. Why not use a word that's less illusionistic?
Yeah.
It's this whole world is the playful manifestation of Divine Mother.
Yeah, like Mojar Kuti, just like a show.
Okay, so what term are you saying is that manifestation?
Is the Mahamaya, is the great...
I don't think so. I think the context suggests that it's very much referring to the delusive aspect of Shakti. And it's because Mahamaya is deluding us that we should take refuge in her, right? To beg her not to delude us anymore. That seems to be the logic.
And in the other statements, that God himself is this Mahamaya, is through her elusive. I see it as like an aspect of Shiva, God himself, and Shakti.
Again, I think you're reading too much into Nikhilananda's English rather than the original Bengali. It could be, but there's no evidence for it in the original text. But that's an interesting suggestion that the himself would be the Shiva and then the Shakti would be the more dynamic aspect.
So what would you suggest as a translation for Maya then?
I would opt for leaving it untranslated. Just with Kamini Kanchan, I would say the same thing.
So like a footnote for explaining the delusive thing that you've just said.
Yeah, okay. Exactly.
And then just a comment. Even we as individuals enjoy what in other circumstances, if we feel the context is safe, we enjoy things that would be otherwise uncomfortable, like fear, like watching a scary movie, right? Even though that's not generally a comfortable feeling, within the certain context, we enjoy it quite deeply. Some of us do. So I just think that's also something to think of in reference to the question of evil, or the why does she make us run around like this, right? That, like, from the perspective of knowing I'm not this little self, it's completely safe to go through all of these otherwise terrifying
Right, yeah.
events.
No, that's a nice way of putting it. Well, once you have that realization.
Yes.
The Vigyan is enjoying all the fun. And there's a story of Sri Ramakrishna when he sees a wounded butterfly pierced with a splinter. And he feels terrible anguish for the butterfly, thinking, what poor, cruel boy must have inflicted the suffering on the butterfly. And then he starts laughing in ecstasy, and he goes into the state of what seems to be Vijnana, and he says, "Oh Rama, now I see you have created your own distress." Because he sees Rama in the form of the butterfly, the splinter, and the boy inflicting the suffering. Yeah, thank you. And I do want to finish this section. So the last thing I want to point out from a translation standpoint is the stuff about the wedding ceremony. It's a little bit puzzling to me, because in Niklajanji's translation, it's written, in northwest India, the bride holds a knife in her hand, at the time of marriage. In Bengal, a nut cutter. Okay. In fact, it's the opposite in the Bangla. It's the groom who holds the knife in his hand at the time of marriage. So, because the word is bor. Bor is groom. Okay, so that's just one thing. But the meaning is the same. The meaning is that the bridegroom, with the help of the bride, who is the embodiment of the divine power, will sever the bondage of illusion. So it's actually the groom holding the knife, but the significance is that with the help of his soon-to-be wife, they're going to slash through this Maya and attain the highest goal of life. I think this is important because in Hinduism, marriage is considered a sacred rite. And the fundamental purpose of marriage is not enjoyment and not just companionship or any of those things. Those can be values along the way, but the ultimate goal is trying to see each other as spiritual companions, helping each other on their respective spiritual journeys to attain the highest goal of life. And so Sri Ramakrishna would encourage householders, when they asked him questions about what they should do, he would say, after having one or two children, try to live like brother and sister. So I think that's implied in this as well. Okay? Yes.
Rather interesting that he mentioned this in this passage, because I just actually learned myself a few days ago reading Elaine Pagel's work on the writing of Genesis and the female iconization in the chapter. The Hebrew word for helper, as used in the Bible about 15 or 20 so times that they described it, usually has been interpreted as being helper, but it's actually ezer. But its actual root and more archaic meaning is actually rescuer, which therefore kind of relates to the imagery describing here the relationship between the groom and the bride. As you were originally saying, it sounded, as it's written here, that the bride is holding the knife. When she's offering, Eve is offering Adam the apple, is supposed to be that severing between that which is the original pure state of natural state of actual existence, separating and giving the truth of knowledge. She's actually the rescuer to Adam to start, I guess, the beginning of the Leela. So
okay, these are interesting ideas. I mean, these are all very creative kind of extrapolations from a wrong translation. So Adya was also kind of pushing the Shiva thing too. But one can do that. But I do think it's important also to go back to the original and acknowledge that Sri Ramakrishna says that it's the groom, right, that holds the knife. And you make an interesting. I think that helper might be better than rescuer in this context. I don't think the wife is rescuing the husband or soon-to-be husband so much as aiding him and aiding each other, I think, is the implication. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Rescue is something that God does, I think, more than Uddhara, right? That would be the Sanskrit term. Okay, I do want to finish the section. We have one last paragraph, but it's quite interesting. So, Sri Ramakrishna says, after attaining God, one forgets his external splendor. I think, again, it should be her. One forgets her external splendor, the glories of her creation. One doesn't think of God's glories after one has seen her. The devotee, once immersed in God's bliss, doesn't calculate anymore about outer things. When I see Narendra, I don't need to ask him, what's your name? Where do you live? Where is the time for such questions? Once a man asked Hanuman which day of the fortnight it was. Brother, said Hanuman, I don't know anything of the day of the week or the fortnight or the position of the stars. I think of Rama alone. This is one of those cases where M often gives section headings. Within a chapter, there are going to be multiple section headings. I skipped some of them, but this one is extremely interesting. So I want to read you M's section heading just for this one paragraph, which ends this entry from August 24th, 1882. It's long. And it's, M was a triple master's degree holder, and so it's very interesting. I'll have to parse it slowly. Darshanet par oishurjo bhul hoy. That's the first part of his section heading, which means after realization, one forgets about or overlooks the glories of God. Then, number 2, nana gyan aparavidya. Nana jnana. Knowledge of nanatvam, which is multiplicity. That is aparavidya. That's a term used in Mundaka Upanishad, the inferior knowledge, as opposed to paravidya, which gives you the knowledge of the akshara, the Brahman, supreme truth. Then he says, just to clarify why he's saying all this, originally in English, he's writing religion and science. He's really reading a lot into this one paragraph. It's very interesting. This is his own interpretation. And then the final part of this section heading, he writes Shatik or Rajasik Gyan. Rajasik, Sattvika and Rajasika knowledge. All of that he's finding in this one paragraph. And I think it's really interesting to kind of try to figure out what he means by all this, or at least by some of it. The first one is the simplest, Darshan par oishurja bhul hoy, because that's exactly what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. After realizing God, one doesn't care so much about looking at God's glories. Sri Ramakrishna, in other places in the Gospel, will refer to the analogy of a garden. He says, when you visit a wondrous garden, people are so just sort of overwhelmed with the beauty of the garden, they don't bother to ask, who is the gardener? The person who's responsible for making all these wonderful, or at least for planting all these wonderful plants and all this. Right? Okay, so that's that idea. But then it gets more interesting, I think, M's suggestion. Nana gyan aparavidya, religion and science. I think what he's suggesting is religion and science are these two different domains, and that science is the domain of the knowledge of multiplicity, the aparavidya, this inferior knowledge, because you're focused on God's glories, God's manifestation as everything in this world. But the focus is not God. In religion is paravidya. It's the supreme knowledge, the supreme truth, and you're focusing on God rather than God's glories or God's manifestation as this world or in this world. And this reminds me of a theory of Stephen Jay Gould's. Some people, I assume, have heard of Stephen Jay Gould, a very famous scholar. I think he was at Harvard, or maybe MIT. I think Harvard. He had this idea. He asked the question, how exactly does science relate to religion? And he describes religion and science as what he calls non-overlapping magisteria. Non-overlapping magisteria, which means science is the domain of that which is perceivable by the five senses. Aparavidya, what M calls aparavidya, the knowledge of this multiplicity, which we see with our eyes, which we hear with our ears, and so on and so forth. And religion is the domain of the supersensuous, that which transcends the senses, that which cannot be perceived by the senses, but which can be perceived through supersensuous perception. So in that case, they're non-overlapping because then there isn't necessarily a conflict. Some people think that science is contradicting religion or refuting religion, or that religion is supplanting science or competing with science, but it need not be. So Stephen Jay Gould's idea is that they are non-overlapping magisteria, so then there's no conflict. One is aparavidya, the other is paravidya. Yeah.
I think Swamiji actually says something a lot like that.
Oh yeah.
I just can't cite from where. Swamiji says something a lot like that.
He has lectures called Religion and Science, or Science and Religion. But his views are a little bit more radical too in some ways, because he also says that if you pursue science far enough, you end up hitting that same religious absolute, spiritual absolute. And arguably physics might be moving in that direction. We have a physicist here from UCLA who might be able to vouch for that. Okay. Okay, now, should I open it to online questions? Any online questions? Okay, do we want to, can you bring the mic to Dinesh first, and then we'll come back to in-person. Yeah, let's give the online people a chance.
Okay, so I'm going to try to stick, at least at first, to the questions that seem to be directly related to the talk.
Thank you.
So, is there an implicit reason why Shakti is always visualized as female? For seeing her as mother, wife, etc., isn't the manifestation of God in all creatures male and female?
Right. The manifestation, okay, so why is it she, look, I mean, the thing is, that's from our standpoint, and there's the story of, I think Sri Ramakrishna says it, he says, who was the one that, there's, somebody was putting a sacred thread, which is the Brahmins wear a sacred thread, putting it on Kali, on the image of Kali. And somebody asked, why are you doing that? She's a woman, you don't put that on. I said, I still haven't figured, I've been puzzling my head over this, but I can't figure out whether Kali is a man or a woman. So I think that's the truth, is that God is obviously not gendered in that sense, is that God is beyond gender and can assume all sorts of genders. But from our standpoint, from the standpoint of spiritual aspirants and from the standpoint even of realized souls, Sri Ramakrishna loved to think of himself as a child of the Divine Mother. And so she would lovingly manifest, or God would lovingly manifest as Divine Mother for him. That doesn't mean that she's also not equally he. That would be my take on it. Mm-hmm. And we're all Prakriti. And Krishna alone is the sole male. Yeah, right. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. This person seems to feel that there is a paradox in the statement, doubts of the mind do not disappear without self-realization. Mm-hmm. Doubts of the mind will not disappear without her grace. Do we not need to believe to receive her grace?
Yeah, right. So I think that the difficulty or dilemma here is, if it's true that doubts don't completely disappear until realization, the problem is we can't arguably, you can't attain realization so long as you're plagued by doubts. But I don't think that's true, actually. I think that the Vedantic line is that you can still have doubts and still realize God. That's the whole purpose of grace. The idea behind grace is it's unearned. And even if we're unworthy, even if we still have certain doubts, our mind isn't completely clear, God will graciously bestow knowledge and liberation upon us. And in fact, I'll add one thing in the context of God's grace. I forgot to mention it earlier, which is that Sri Ramakrishna will say in some places, he says, the gentle breeze of God's grace is always blowing. It's always blowing. But we need to take advantage of it. How do we take advantage of it? By setting the sail. And then we can take advantage of it. So God's grace is blowing, but we, from our side, need to engage in spiritual practices and be as sincere as we can. Thanks. In person. Any questions, thoughts? Yeah, Adya in the front. And Rahul, do you have your hand up too? Yeah, okay, after her.
I had a quick comment about when you realize God, the manifestations seem like pale in comparison. I think the first part of that section heading that you were talking about.
Darshanet por oishurya bhool hai. Bhool means like you forget about the glories of God, yeah.
That reminds me of Nisargadatta Maharaj's comment about, like, I see God like the sun in the sky, and when the sun is there and the moon appears while the sun is shining, it's so pale. So samsara and the world appears like that pale moon. But God to me is like that sun that's blazing in the sky.
Yeah, it pales in comparison. That's nice, thank you. Rahul?
So I was Just thinking that the solution to the problem of evil, I think the Advaitic solution is really very clean, right? There's no
It's
evil.
elegant.
It's very elegant.
No world, no problem.
And it seems that
Could be a rap song.
the ultimate Viganic kind of viewpoint comes close to that, or borrows some elements of it. Which is,
well, tell that. Explain that.
like, I think, well, ultimately it's saying that, you know, if you think about evil and good, then you're thinking about duality, but since it's all the Divine Mother.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay, I see. But there is a difference. Yeah, I see what you're saying. There's a similarity, but in the sense of appealing to a kind of non-dual truth.
Yeah.
But the difference is that the classical Advaitic solution, quote-unquote solution, to the problem of evil is denying the existence of evil. If there's no world, there can't be any evil. All of that only exists from the standpoint of ignorance. So it only has empirical reality. But from the standpoint of the highest truth, which is Brahman, there's no world and therefore no evil. The Vijnana approach to the problem of evil is not denying the reality of evil. Divine Mother actually playfully manifests as both good and evil. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says Divine Mother has become both avidyamaya and vidyamaya. Classical Advaitins won't accept that. Thanks. Do you want to give Leela the mic?
I was just remembering a line from the Mahatmya. She is the great Devi and she's great Asuri. Yeah.
She's the great what?
The great Devi and the great Asuri.
What's the last word?
Asuri.
Asuri. Oh, I see. Yeah, Devi and Asuri. Yeah, yeah. So she's both. And so, yeah, that could be, you can align the Asuri more with the Avidyamaya, the Devi with the Vidyamaya. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? Going once, going twice? No? You're tempted. I could see your... Okay, you should feel free. If you want, you can ask one more. No? We do. Okay, go ahead.
Does God's play have some rules that can help me get familiar and comfortable with it? You mentioned three things. I think one was karma.
Oh, yeah. So the other two. So evolutionary karma is the first rule. Second rule is rebirth. Third rule is universal liberation. So all three are a package deal, and they should all, taken together, give us comfort and consolation. That no matter how tough it is, how difficult the struggle, the challenges, we'll all make it out in the end. And evolutionary karma is beautiful because whatever we do in this life, even if we just make a tiny bit of progress, that'll carry over into our next life, and we'll pick up where we left off. Yeah.
And the language of this one was a little confused, so I'm just going to try to sum it up. Why can't we use intellectuality to realize Brahman?
Because yato vacho nivattante apraapya manasa saha, Taittiriya Upanishad says, that ultimate reality is beyond the reach of mind and beyond the reach of speech. We have to add some nuance to this if you're asking about Sri Ramakrishna's position, because in one place in the Gospel, somewhere else, somebody says, Brahman cannot be realized through the mind. And he says, no, it cannot be realized through the impure mind. But then he says, Shuddha Moon, Shuddha Buddhi, Shuddha Atma act. The pure mind, pure Buddhi, and pure Atma are one and the same. And that's also in the Upanishads. Sukshmaya, Darshibhihi. What is it? Turagya Buddhya, Sukshmaya, Darshibhihi. Which means you can directly perceive the absolute by means of a refined intellect. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, yes, Adya now has a question.
Yeah, I was going to add.
Yes.
Okay, I was just thinking about it. Like an impure mind is like a lens with a lot of like dirt on it and a lot of distortions. An impure mind is like super clear and transparent, to a point where it almost like is so transparent that reality can be perceived even through it, even despite it.
Right.
And also the other thing is awareness or consciousness is something that's prior to intellect or prior to mind. So
what's prior to mind, sorry?
Awareness or consciousness or reality is prior to mind.
Yeah.
Mind is
mind is insentient, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, from an Indian standpoint, mind itself, manas in antakarana, is completely insentient. It's not conscious.
Intellect is something we're aware of.
Yeah, yeah. So that's another way of answering the question about why we can't realize it through the mind in that sense, because it's the mind itself is insentient, but it can be a kind of translucent mirror through which Brahman can be perceived. Something like that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we're good. Very good. Thank you everyone for the nice discussion. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.